He still loved to watch the sunset, but now he often had children sitting beside him, asking questions about plants, life, and kindness. He told them stories about his past, about mistakes and redemption, about how a single act of kindness could change the entire course of a life. When asked if he regretted anything, he would pause and smile softly, then say, "Everything that happened brought me here, to this bench, to this garden, to you. So no, I don't regret a thing." His words carried a weight that lingered in young hearts long after they left. One afternoon, as Thomas was tending to some tomato plants, he saw Emily approaching with Lily and Noah. Emily looked radiant, her eyes bright with gratitude and strength. She handed Thomas a small potted plant, a young sunflower. "We wanted you to have this," she said. "It reminds us of you, strong, bright, and always turning toward the light." Thomas felt his eyes water as he accepted the plant. He placed it in a sunny corner of the garden, promising to care for it as if it were a child. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in fiery colors, Thomas sat beside the sunflower, feeling the warmth of community and love surround him. He looked up at the sky, his heart full, and whispered a quiet prayer of thanks. Not for riches or comfort, but for connection, for the simple, unyielding power of kindness. And in that moment, Thomas knew that even a man with nothing could become a beacon for an entire town. As summer melted into autumn, Thomas's garden became a local sanctuary where laughter of children mixed with the gentle rustling of leaves. The once forgotten homeless man was now at the heart of the town's new spirit of compassion. Schools began organizing field trips to the garden, and teachers spoke of Thomas's story as a lesson on humility and kindness. One crisp morning, Thomas received a letter from a local high school principal, inviting him to speak at an assembly. At first he hesitated, overwhelmed by fear and self-doubt. But Emily encouraged him, reminding him of how many lives he had already touched. When the day arrived, Thomas stood on the auditorium stage in his patched army jacket, facing hundreds of young faces. He shared his journey, his failures, and the simple act that had changed everything. He spoke of human dignity and the invisible battles people fight every day. His words flowed not from a polished speech, but straight from his heart. And the students listened, captivated. When he finished, the hall erupted in applause. Many students lined up to hug him, tears shining in their eyes. A few days later, a local news station covered Thomas's story, broadcasting it far beyond their small town. Messages began pouring in from across the country, people sharing how they had helped strangers.
"Ma'am, we've got this," Officer Chen said, though his tone suggested he was already beginning to sense something was off. He looked at Marcus more carefully now, his expression shifting from suspicion to recognition. "Wait, aren't you?" But before he could finish, 3 more police cars arrived, their sirens dying as they parked haphazardly around the scene. Chief Rodriguez himself stepped out of the last vehicle, his face a mask of professional calm that didn't quite hide his concern. "What's the situation here?" Rodriguez asked, his eyes taking in the scene. The Ferrari, the crowd, the Hutchinsons standing like victorious generals, and Marcus Williams, his city's newly elected mayor, standing with his hands visible like a common criminal. The chief's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Mr. Williams," he said, his voice carrying across the garage, "is everything all right?" The Hutchinsons' expressions began to shift, confusion replacing certainty. "You know him?" Harold asked, his voice losing some of its earlier authority. Rodriguez turned to face them fully, his presence suddenly feeling much larger. "Know him? This is Marcus Williams. He owns that Ferrari. He lives in this building." The chief paused, letting the weight of his next words land fully. "And as of tomorrow noon, he'll be our city's new mayor." The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the steady drum of rain and the idle hum of police engines. Linda's face had drained of all color, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. Harold took a step back, his phone dropping to his side, still recording, but forgotten. The crowd began to murmur, phones switching from recording to Googling, confirming what the chief had just revealed. That's impossible," Linda stammered. "He can't be. I mean, we didn't—" Marcus finally lowered his hands, straightening his tie with deliberate calm. "Officers, I appreciate your quick response, though I have to say, being suspected of stealing my own car in my own building's garage is certainly a new experience." His voice carried no anger, just a tired familiarity with this particular brand of humiliation. He turned to the Hutchinsons. "Mr. and Mrs. Hutchinson, yes, I know who you are. I'm curious what exactly made you so certain I was stealing this car." Harold's face had turned a deep shade of red, embarrassment and indignation warring across his features. We were just being vigilant. You can't be too careful these days." The coded language hung in the air like a bad smell. "Vigilant," Marcus repeated, tasting the word. "And what exactly were you being vigilant about? A well-dressed man getting into an expensive car in a secured garage of a building he lives in?" Chief Rodriguez stepped forward. "Mr. and Mrs. Hutchinson, are you aware that making a false 911 call is a crime, especially one that could have resulted in serious consequences?" Linda found her voice again, though it had lost its earlier shrillness. "We didn't know. How were we supposed to know? He doesn't look like someone who could—" She trailed off, realizing there was no good way to finish that sentence. "Like someone who could afford a Ferrari?" Marcus offered. "Like someone who could be your neighbor? Like someone who could be your mayor?" Each question landed like a verbal jab, precise and devastating. "Or did you mean I don't look like someone who belongs here at all?" The crowd was growing restless, some people beginning to voice their disapproval of the Hutchinsons' actions. "That's messed up," someone called out. "They do this all the time," another voice added, "always calling security on guests who don't look right." Officer Chen had pulled out his notepad. "Mr. Williams, would you like to press charges for false reporting?" The question hung in the air, and Marcus could feel everyone waiting for his answer. It would be justified, certainly. The Hutchinsons had not only embarrassed themselves, but had put him in real danger. Every black man in America knew how these encounters could end, regardless of wealth or status. But Marcus was thinking beyond this moment, to tomorrow's inauguration, to the city he was about to lead. "No charges," Marcus said finally, "but I do think Mr. and Mrs. Hutchinson and I need to have a conversation. A real one." He pulled out his phone, checking the time. "In fact, why don't we have it right now, all of us?" He gestured to the crowd. "Since everyone seems so interested in the safety and security of our building." Harold started to protest. "We don't have to," but Linda grabbed his arm, perhaps finally understanding the magnitude of their mistake. "Harold, stop." She turned to Marcus, her voice small. "Mr. Williams, We're sorry, we didn't mean. But Marcus held up his hand. You didn't mean what? To racially profile me? To assume I was a criminal? To put my life at risk because I didn't fit your image of who belongs here? His voice had risen slightly, years of similar encounters fueling his words. The rain had begun to let up, the drumming on the garage entrance softening to a patter. Chief Rodriguez dismissed most of the officers, keeping only Chen and Miller for the report. The crowd, however, seemed reluctant to disperse, sensing that something important was happening. Marcus walked over to his Ferrari, running his hand along its sleek lines. You know, I bought this car to celebrate a lifetime of hard work. Every time I drive it, I think about my father, who worked 2 jobs to put me through school. My mother, who cleaned houses so I could have books. They sacrificed everything so I could have opportunities they never did. He turned back to face the Hutchinsons in the crowd. But no matter what I achieve, no matter what I drive or where I live, there will always be people who see me as a threat first and a human being second. Tonight, that was you, Mr. and Mrs. Hutchinson. Tomorrow, it might be someone else, but I'm tired of it. We should all be tired of it. A young woman in the crowd stepped forward. I'm sorry, Mr. Williams. I should have said something. I knew you lived here. I've seen you around. Others began to nod, murmuring similar sentiments. The Hutchinsons stood isolated now, islands of discomfort in a sea of awakening consciousness. Marcus could see Linda's eyes beginning to water, though whether from shame or self-pity, he couldn't tell. The thing is, Marcus continued, this isn't just about me. How many other people have you done this to? Delivery drivers, guests, prospective residents? How many people have you made feel unwelcome or unsafe because they didn't match your narrow view of who belongs? The questions hung in the air, unanswered but heavy with truth. Harold finally found his voice again, though it was defensive and weak. We were just trying to protect our property. You have to understand, there's been a crime in the area? Has there? Marcus challenged. Or is that just what you tell yourself to justify your prejudice? Because I've seen the crime statistics for this neighborhood, Mr. Hutchinson. We're one of the safest areas in the city. So what exactly are you protecting against? The older man had no answer, his mouth working soundlessly. Chief Rodriguez stepped forward. Mr. Williams is right. This area has had exactly 2 reported thefts in the past year. Both of them bicycles left unlocked outside. There's no crime wave, no gang of Ferrari thieves targeting luxury buildings. The crowd began to disperse slowly, but not before many approached Marcus to apologize or offer support. Some shook his hand, others simply nodded respectfully. The Hutchinsons tried to slip away, but Marcus called out to them. We're not done here. They stopped, turning back reluctantly. Marcus walked over to them, his footsteps echoing in the now quieter garage. Tomorrow I become mayor of this city. All of it, including you. And I need you to understand something. He looked them both in the eye, his gaze steady and unwavering. What happened tonight is a symptom of a larger disease, one that's infected our city, our country, for far too long. And we can either be part of the cure or continue to be part of the problem. Linda's tears were flowing freely now. We're not racist, she said, the words coming out as a plea. We have black friends. Marcus almost laughed at the cliche, but managed to keep his expression neutral. Having black friends doesn't mean you can't have racist assumptions, Mrs. Hutchinson. Tonight you saw a black man near an expensive car and immediately assumed he was a criminal. That's racism, whether you meant it to be or not. The truth of it seemed to hit Harold like a physical blow. He staggered slightly, his hand reaching out to steady himself against a concrete pillar. But we voted for you, he said, as if this absolved them. We voted for you for mayor. Now Marcus did laugh, though there was no humor in it. You voted for the idea of me, the successful businessman who was going to clean up City Hall. But when you saw the real me, just a black man in a parking garage, you called the police. Chief Rodriguez had been taking notes throughout the exchange. Mr. Williams, I'll need a full statement from you. And Mr. and Mrs. Hutchinson, I'll need one from you as well. False 911 calls waste resources and put lives at risk. The Hutchinsons nodded numbly, the reality of potential consequences finally settling in. Marcus reached into his briefcase, pulling out a business card. This is my direct line. I want you both to call me next week. We're going to sit down and have a real conversation about this. And then you're going to help me figure out how to prevent this from happening to anyone else." Harold took the card with shaking hands. "Why would you want to talk to us after this?" Marcus's expression softened slightly. "Because change doesn't happen by writing people off. It happens by bringing them in even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." He paused, then added, "But make no mistake, this isn't about making you feel better. It's about making sure no one else has to go through what I went through tonight." The garage had returned to its normal quiet state, just the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of traffic. Marcus's Ferrari sat in its spot, raindrops still beating on its polished surface, looking no different than it had an hour ago. But everything had changed. The Hutchinsons walked away slowly, their earlier confidence completely evaporated. They looked older somehow, smaller, as if the weight of their actions had physically diminished them. Marcus turned to Chief Rodriguez. "Thank you for coming personally, Chief. Though I have to ask, would the response have been the same if you hadn't recognized my name?" Rodriguez considered the question carefully. "Honestly, probably not. And that's something we need to address in the department. No one should need to be the mayor-elect to be treated with dignity and respect." It was an honest answer, and Marcus appreciated it. Officer Chen approached with his notepad. "Mr. Williams, I just need to get your statement for the record." As Marcus recounted the events, he could see Chen's jaw tightening with each detail. "For what it's worth, sir, I'm sorry this happened to you, and I'm glad it didn't escalate further." The young officer paused, then added, "My father went through something similar once. Different generation, same story." As the last police car pulled away, Marcus stood alone in the garage with his Ferrari. He ran his hand over the car's roof, feeling the cool metal beneath his palm. Tomorrow this car would be parked in the mayor's reserved spot at City Hall. Tomorrow he would speak about unity and progress and justice. But tonight had reminded him how far they still had to go. He thought about his father, who had faced far worse with far less recourse. His mother, who had taught him to hold his head high even when the world tried to make him feel small. His phone buzzed with messages. Janet, his campaign team, even a few reporters who had somehow already heard about the incident. Word traveled fast in Riverside, especially word this salacious. By morning it would be everywhere. The mayor-elect profiled in his own building. He could already see the headlines, the social media outrage, the think pieces. But Marcus wasn't interested in becoming a symbol or a cautionary tale. He was interested in change, real and lasting. The next morning arrived gray and drizzly, matching the subdued mood that had settled over Riverside Towers. Marcus stood in his penthouse, adjusting his tie in the mirror while watching the news coverage on his tablet. The story had indeed broken, with various outlets picking their angles. Some focused on the racial profiling aspect, others on the irony of it happening to the mayor-elect. But Marcus noticed something else in the coverage. A conversation starting, voices calling for examination of assumptions, of privilege, of who gets to belong and who gets to decide. His phone rang. It was Linda Hutchinson. "Mr. Williams, I couldn't sleep. Harold couldn't either. We wanted to call before your inauguration, to apologize again, and to ask, what can we do? How can we make this right?" Her voice was different, stripped of its usual imperious tone. Marcus paused, considering his words carefully. "You can start by examining why you made the assumptions you did. Really examining them, not just saying you're not racist. And then you can help me make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else." There was silence on the line. Then Linda said, "We want to come to your inauguration, to show support. Would that be appropriate?" Marcus almost said no, the wound still too fresh. But then he thought about the message it would send, not just to the Hutchinsons, but to everyone watching. "Yes," he said finally. "Come, sit in the front row. Let everyone see that change is possible, even after our worst moments." The inauguration ceremony was held on the steps of City Hall, despite the drizzle. 3,000 umbrellas created a sea of color against the gray sky. Marcus stood at the podium, looking out at the crowd, black and white, rich and poor, young and old. All of Riverside coming together despite their differences. He spotted the Hutchinsons in the front row, looking uncomfortable but present. That was a start. Yesterday, Marcus began, departing from his prepared speech. I was reminded that the work we're about to undertake is not abstract. It's personal. It's about the assumptions we make when we see each other on the street, in our buildings, in our neighborhoods. It's about who we think belongs and who we think doesn't. The crowd grew quiet, sensing something important was happening. Last night, I was accused of stealing my own car in my own building's garage. The police were called, and for a few moments, I wasn't your mayor-elect. I was just another black man who didn't belong. He could see the shock rippling through the crowd, phones coming out, the moment being captured and shared in real time. But here's what I learned. The same community that can perpetuate injustice can also be the source of justice. We can choose to see each other as threats or as neighbors. We can choose fear or we can choose hope. His eyes found the Hutchinsons again. Linda was crying openly now, and Harold had his arm around her, his own eyes glistening. The couple who called the police on me are here today. They're sitting in the front row. Not because they're proud of what they did, but because they're willing to confront it, to learn from it, to grow from it. And if they can do that, if we can do that together, then there's hope for all of us. The crowd began to applaud, slowly at first, then building to thunderous approval. It wasn't just applause for Marcus, but for the possibility he represented, that people could change, that cities could heal, that the long arc of justice could bend a little faster with effort and understanding. After the ceremony, Marcus made his way through the crowd, shaking hands, taking photos, listening to stories. Many people shared their own experiences of profiling, of being made to feel like outsiders in their own communities. But they also shared hope, excitement for what Marcus's leadership might bring. The Hutchinsons approached him tentatively. Harold extended his hand, which Marcus shook firmly. "We meant what we said on the phone," Harold said. "We want to help. We want to learn." The couple who called the police on me are here today. They're sitting in the front row. Not because they're proud of what they did, but because they're willing to confront it, to learn from it, to grow from it. And if they can do that, if we can do that together, then there's hope for all of us. The crowd began to applaud, slowly at first, then building to thunderous approval. It wasn't just applause for Marcus, but for the possibility he represented, that people could change, that cities could heal, that the long arc of justice could bend a little faster with effort and understanding. After the ceremony, Marcus made his way through the crowd, shaking hands, taking photos, listening to stories. Many people shared their own experiences of profiling, of being made to feel like outsiders in their own communities. But they also shared hope, excitement for what Marcus's leadership might bring. The Hutchinsons approached him tentatively. Harold extended his hand, which Marcus shook firmly. "We meant what we said on the phone," Harold said. "We want to help. We want to learn." Marcus nodded. "Good. Because I meant what I said too. This isn't about punishment or shame. It's about growth. It's about building a city where everyone truly belongs." Linda stepped forward. "We've already started talking to our neighbors about what happened, about why it was wrong. Some of them are uncomfortable, but they're listening." It was a small step, but it was a step forward. As the day progressed, Marcus found himself thinking about the Ferrari sitting in the mayor's parking spot. It had become more than just a car. It was a symbol of success that threatened some and inspired others. But most importantly, it was his, earned through hard work and determination. And no one's assumptions could take that away from him. That evening, as Marcus sat in his new office at City Hall, Chief Rodriguez knocked on the door. "Mr. Mayor, I wanted to let you know that we're implementing new training protocols about implicit bias, about de-escalation, about seeing the full humanity of everyone we encounter." Marcus smiled. "That's a start, Chief. But training isn't enough. We need accountability. We need community involvement. We need to rebuild trust from the ground up." Rodriguez nodded. "I agree. And I think what happened to you, as unfortunate as it was, might be the catalyst we needed. Sometimes it takes something shocking to wake people up." They discussed plans late into the evening, community policing initiatives, citizen review boards, regular forums for dialogue between police and residents. A week later, Marcus held his first community town hall as mayor. The auditorium was packed, with the Hutchinsons sitting in the middle section, surrounded by their neighbors from Riverside Towers. The conversation was difficult at times, with residents sharing painful experiences and frustrated voices demanding immediate change. But there was also something else in the room, a willingness to engage, to listen, to work towards something better. During the Q&A, Linda Hutchinson stood up, her voice trembling but determined. "I want to publicly apologize again for what I did to Mayor Williams. But more than that, I want to apologize to everyone I've ever made feel unwelcome or suspicious because of how they looked. I'm learning that my discomfort with difference isn't anyone else's problem. It's mine to fix." The room was silent for a moment. Then someone started clapping. Soon the entire auditorium was applauding, not for what Linda had done, but for her willingness to own it and change. Marcus used the moment to announce a new initiative, Riverside Together, a series of programs designed to bring different communities into dialogue, to break down the barriers that fear and misunderstanding had built. The Hutchinsons would be among the first participants, sharing their story as a cautionary tale and a hopeful example of the possibility of growth. The program would include structured dialogues, community service projects, and educational workshops about the history and impact of racial profiling. As months passed, the incident at Riverside Towers became a turning point for the city. It sparked conversations in schools, churches, and boardrooms. Other cities reached out to learn about Riverside's approach to addressing bias and building community. Marcus's Ferrari became something of a legend, the car that started a movement. He still drove it occasionally, each time remembering that night in the garage, but also remembering how far they'd come since then. The Hutchinsons became unlikely advocates for racial justice, using their privilege and their platform to challenge others in their social circle. Harold joined the Citizen Police Review Board, bringing a perspective of someone who had been on the wrong side of an issue and learned from it. Linda started a book club focused on understanding racism and privilege, meeting monthly in the Riverside Towers community room. Their transformation wasn't perfect or complete, growth never is, but it was genuine. 1 year after the incident, Marcus held a press conference in the same parking garage where it had all happened. The Hutchinsons stood beside him, along with Chief Rodriguez, Officer Chen, and many of the residents who had witnessed that night. "A year ago, this garage was the site of fear, prejudice, and misunderstanding," Marcus said. "Today, it's a symbol of what's possible when we choose courage over comfort, growth over stagnation, and community over division." He announced that Riverside had seen a 40% decrease in racial profiling incidents, thanks to new policies, training, and community engagement. But more than statistics, he shared stories. The Black delivery driver who no longer feared entering upscale buildings, the Latino family who felt welcomed in previously hostile neighborhoods, the young Asian entrepreneur who opened a business downtown without facing suspicious looks and whispered doubts. The transformation wasn't just in policies or programs, but in people. Marcus thought about his father, who had faced discrimination with dignity, but without recourse. His mother, who had cleaned the houses of people who wouldn't have seen her as a neighbor. They had paved the way for Marcus to not just succeed despite the system, but to change it. Every policy he implemented, every conversation he facilitated, was a tribute to their sacrifice and a down payment on a better future. The Ferrari still sat in his garage, but it had taken on new meaning. It wasn't just a symbol of personal success anymore. It was a reminder that success meant nothing if it didn't lift others up. Marcus had started a scholarship program for young people from underserved communities, funded in part by speaking fees he earned telling the story of that night in the garage. Each scholarship recipient received a model Ferrari with a note: "Dream big, work hard, and never let anyone tell you what you can achieve or where you don't belong." As the sun set over Riverside on the anniversary of that fateful night, Marcus stood in his office looking out at the city he served. The Hutchinsons had sent him a letter that morning, thanking him again for his grace and for pushing them to grow. They had included a photo from a recent community event, Harold teaching kids from the inner city about financial literacy, Linda serving food at a homeless shelter. They looked happy, fulfilled in a way they hadn't before, when their world was smaller and more fearful. The change in Riverside wasn't complete. Change never is. There were still incidents, still resistance, Still those who preferred the comfort of their prejudices to the discomfort of growth. But there was also momentum, hope, and a growing recognition that diversity wasn't a threat to be managed, but a strength to be celebrated. Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from a young black entrepreneur who had just bought a Tesla and wanted to thank Marcus for making him feel like he could drive it anywhere without fear. That night, Marcus drove his Ferrari through the streets of Riverside, windows down, music playing. He passed through neighborhoods rich and poor, diverse and homogeneous, each one part of the city he had sworn to serve. At a red light, a young black kid on the sidewalk stared at the car in awe. Marcus waved him over. "Want to sit in it?" he asked. The kid's eyes went wide as he nodded enthusiastically. As the child sat in the driver's seat, hands on the wheel, dreams probably racing through his mind, Marcus thought about cycles, how they can be vicious or virtuous, how they can trap us or free us. "What's your name?" Marcus asked. "Jamal," the kid replied, still mesmerized by the car's interior. "Well, Jamal, let me tell you something. This car is nice, but it's just a thing. What matters is who you are, what you stand for, and how you treat others. Don't let anyone ever make you feel like you don't deserve success or that you don't belong somewhere. You belong everywhere you choose to be." Jamal nodded solemnly, then asked, "Even if people call the cops on you?" Marcus smiled sadly. "Especially then. That's when you show them who you really are." As Jamal climbed out of the car and ran back to his waiting mother, Marcus saw her mouth thank you with tears in her eyes. These moments, these small connections, these planted seeds of possibility were what mattered. The incident with the Hutchinsons had been painful, humiliating, and dangerous. But it had also been transformative, not just for them or for Marcus, but for an entire city willing to confront its demons and reach for something better. Marcus drove home to Riverside Towers, pulling into the same garage where it had all happened. The space looked different now, brighter somehow, even though the lighting hadn't changed. David, the concierge, waved enthusiastically. The garage had become something of a pilgrimage site for those interested in social justice, with regular tours explaining what had happened and what had changed as a result. The Hutchinsons sometimes led these tours, sharing their shame but also their growth, challenging visitors to examine their own biases. In his penthouse, Marcus opened his laptop to work on his speech for the upcoming National Mayor's Conference. He'd been asked to speak about transforming crisis into community, sharing Riverside's story with leaders from across the country. The speech wrote itself, flowing from his fingertips with the ease of lived experience. He wrote about the danger of assumptions, the power of accountability, and the possibility of redemption. He wrote about the Hutchinsons, who had gone from calling the cops on him to calling him a friend. He wrote about Chief Rodriguez, who had turned a moment of injustice into a movement for reform. But mostly he wrote about hope, not naive optimism that ignored real problems, but the fierce, determined hope that recognized how far we had to go while celebrating how far we'd come. He wrote about his parents and who had hoped for a better world for their son. He wrote about Jamal, who would grow up in a different Riverside than the one that had existed a year ago. He wrote about the Ferrari, which had become a symbol not of what separated us, but of what was possible when we refused to be limited by others' expectations. As midnight approached, Marcus saved his speech and walked to his window, looking out at the city lights below. Somewhere out there, the Hutchinsons were probably sleeping, their consciences clearer than they had been a year ago. Somewhere, Chief Rodriguez was reviewing new policies that would make the city safer for everyone. Somewhere, a young person was dreaming of success, feeling a little more possible because of the changes happening in Riverside. The rain had returned, gentle this time, washing the city clean for tomorrow's challenges and opportunities. Marcus thought about his inauguration promise to serve all of Riverside's citizens, even those who hadn't seen his humanity at first glance. It was a promise he renewed every day, with every policy, every speech, every interaction. The Ferrari key sat on his desk, catching the light from the city below. He picked it up, feeling its weight, remembering that night when it had been both a symbol of his success and nearly a weapon used against him. But keys, Marcus reflected, were about more than cars. They were about access, about belonging, about opening doors that had been closed. And in the years since that night in the garage, He and the Hutchinsons and all of Riverside had been finding new keys to understanding, to justice, to community. They hadn't opened all the doors yet, but they had made a start, and sometimes Marcus knew a start was everything. Sometimes it was the difference between a city trapped in its moisa and one racing toward its future, engine roaring with possibility, all its citizens along for the ride. The story of that night would be told and retold, taking on the quality of legend. But Marcus knew the real story was what came after. The hard work of change, the uncomfortable conversations, the slow dismantling of systems and assumptions that had seemed as permanent as the concrete pillars in that parking garage. It was Harold Hutchinson volunteering as a mentor for young Black entrepreneurs. It was Linda Hutchinson testifying before the state legislature about the danger of racial profiling. It was Chief Rodriguez implementing reforms that became a model for the nation. It was 1,000 small acts of courage and growth that would never make headlines but would change lives. As he finally headed to bed, Marcus paused at his door, looking back at the Ferrari key one more time. Tomorrow he would drive that car to another community meeting, another difficult conversation, another step toward the Riverside they were building together. But tonight he simply held the key and remembered. Remembered the fear, the anger, the humiliation, but also the grace, the growth, and the hope that had emerged from that dark garage into the light of a new day. The rain continued to fall, gentle and cleansing, a benediction over a city learning to see itself and its citizens with new eyes. And in the morning when the sun broke through the clouds, it would illuminate a Riverside that was far from perfect, but was perfectly committed to becoming better. That was Marcus Williams' legacy, not that he had been profiled in his own building, but that he had turned that profiling into progress, that humiliation into hope, that worst night into the first day of something better. For those watching this story, remember, change doesn't require perfection. It requires courage. The courage to confront our biases, to admit our mistakes, to grow beyond our comfort zones. The Hutchinsons could have hidden in their shame. Marcus could have pressed charges and moved on. The city could have treated this as an isolated incident. Instead, they all chose the harder path, the path of growth, reconciliation, and systemic change. We all have the power to be part of this change, to speak up when we witness injustice, to examine our own assumptions, to choose understanding over fear, to build communities where everyone truly belongs. The question isn't whether change is possible. Marcus Williams in the city of Riverside proved that it is. The question is whether we have the courage to pursue it. One conversation, one policy, one transformed heart at a time. What will you do when you witness injustice? How will you respond when your assumptions are challenged? Who will you become when faced with the choice between comfort and growth? These aren't just questions for Riverside. They're questions for all of us in every city, every neighborhood, every parking garage where humanity and prejudice collide. Share this story. Talk about it with your family, your friends, your community. Because change doesn't happen in isolation. It happens when we all decide that the status quo isn't good enough, that we can do better, that we must do better. Marcus Williams's Ferrari will keep driving through Riverside, a symbol of success earned and dignity defended. But the real vehicle of change is us, all of us choosing to drive toward justice, even when the road is rough, even when the destination seems far, even when others try to tell us we don't belong behind the wheel. Subscribe if you believe in the power of transformation. Comment with your own experiences, your own hopes for change. And remember, sometimes the worst moments in our lives can become the catalyst for the best changes in our communities. Sometimes all it takes is one person refusing to be diminished, one community willing to grow, one story powerful enough to open eyes and hearts. Today, you've heard that story. Tomorrow, you could be living it, creating it, sharing it. The key is in your hands. The question is, what doors will you choose to open?